Hey everybody, my name is John DePietro, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to the series of videos that we're doing commemorating Kenny Rogers' 55 or 60-year career, depending on really when you start counting. It's called My Life with Kenny Rogers, but the best part from the fans' perspective, it's not about my life with Kenny Rogers, but it's about the life with Kenny Rogers of our guest, who today happens to be Terry Williams. Terry Williams. I'm looking. Do I have gallery? Yeah, okay, I've got speaker view, so I'm good. So we want to tell you that this is one of a series of special videos that we're doing. And if you want to get a copy of all of them, all you need to do is to, down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, there's a little button that says subscribe, a little red button. Hit that button, and then a bell will pop up. Hit the bell so that every time a new one is put together, you will be the first to get notified of it, and you can look at it before the general public. Remember, this special internet offer is not available in stores. And the discussion that we're going to have today has never been done anywhere in the world, because we have probably one of the persons who is most responsible for Kenny Rogers' success. And we'll tell you that whole story. But first, let me welcome Mr. Terry Williams, one of the founders of the first edition, as it says on his shirt. Terry, welcome to a show about you.
Thank you, John. Applause, applause, applause. Thank you so much.
Well, you were a sound engineer, so you can probably find some sound effects that has wild cheering crowds.
Absolutely. I'll do that later in post.
Yeah, exactly. So we should say, somewhere on the phone here, somewhere on the screen, it might say Deborah's iPhone, and it's because we had to resort to your wife's technological intelligence, which far surpassed yours, to get this thing going. So
correct.
If it says Deborah's iPhone anywhere on the screen here, folks, you'll know that it really is Terry. So Terry, your years with Kenny Rogers go well beyond the first edition, and well before it and well after it. So why don't you give us a elevator pitch as to when you first got to know Kenny and the whole story.
Let me do something real quickly that actually there are two people that were so responsible for our success that were together before. This is before that Kenny, Mike Settle, and I ever even met. This goes before the New Christy Minstrels.
Before
and that
Christy Minstrels,
okay. My mom, who was a big band singer, she sang with Tommy Dorsey.
Tommy Dorsey,
yeah. The female singer along with Frank Sinatra. She went on to become, she did an awful lot of stuff, but when she retired, she started working for Reprise Records. And Jimmy Bowen at Reprise Records. This was down in the old days when Reprise was on Cahuenga. And Reprise was having a lot of trouble right then, and Jimmy all of a sudden got assigned a Dean Martin session, and from out of it came Everybody Loves Somebody. It became a huge record and really helped put Reprise on the map.
I bought that record. I bought it as a 45.
Great record, just a great record.
Of course, you say what a 45 is today, none of the young people know.
45, yeah. 40. Around here, but yeah, the little round things.
Yeah, the little round things with the big hole in the middle. The
right.
CDs with the big hole.
So Reprise moved into the building on Warner Boulevard at Warner Brothers. So Warner Brothers and Reprise both shared the same building. And my mother got me a job at that time. This is in 1965 to 66. In the mail room at Warner's.
In LA.
In LA.
Okay.
So every day I would hand out the mail to Jimmy Bowen and to Mike Maitland and to Mo Austin and to Lenny Waronker and to, just all the monkey monks at Warner Brothers and Reprise. I got the call to audition for the New Christy Minstrels. Now, at the same time, Mike Settle is going to school in Oklahoma with a man named Mason Williams.
Classical jazz.
And he and Mason were very good friends then, and musical friends. Okay, this is before all of us even met each other. So I get the call to join the New Christy Minstrels, which I did, and I joined in 1966. And it was myself, Kenny Rogers, Kim Carnes, and another gentleman named Mark Hawley. And we were 4 new members, and we joined the New Christy Minstrels at the same time. At the time, Mike Settle was the musical director of the New Christy Minstrels. So we all basically auditioned for Mike. Mike was a well-known folk writer, had written several very popular folk songs. But at that time, also, folk music was really starting to change. And I say that with like Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme, the Simon and Garfunkel album, which was really beginning to morph into a swing. More and more folk groups were becoming folk rock groups. And Mike's songwriting began to reflect that because he really started writing music. But he wrote it like never before. He wrote songs that were much more contemporary than his big hit, which was Maybe I'll Settle Down, which was more like a Pete Seeger song or something.
Mm-hmm.
So he wrote all these songs and he started singing them for me, and we'd sing them backstage at Christy concerts. And I basically started as a session guitar player. So I would play guitar and sing parts to his songs. And we just loved doing it. And we thought maybe we could increase the Christy, rather than singing the old Green Green and Today and all those things, we can do some new contemporary songs. But the Christies weren't interested in that, and they didn't really want to do it. So Mike and I just stayed singing in the background. Mike and I basically were the beginning of the first edition. We decided that we wanted to start our own group. And that was while we were still with the Christy Minstrels.
How old were you at the time, Terry?
I was 19 years old.
19 years old.
Yep. And so Mike and I started singing these songs, and Kenny and I were very, very close in the Christies. We joined at the same time. We were roommates together. We did basically everything together. He was like
he older? Was he older than you guys?
He was indeed. He was really old at that time. He was 27.
Okay, so 8 years is
to me
at that stage of your life, right?
Mm-hmm. He was older. He had already had a record deal. He had already released records. You know, I had never had a record deal or released records. So he wanted to be in the group in the worst way. And Mike and I didn't see him in the group because Kenny came from a jazz background.
Yep.
And his mohair suits, and he wore his hair kind of in a pompadour and things. And
you have those glasses?
Yeah. And he played upright bass, and great upright bass player, great singer. But we just thought we could find somebody more contemporary. And so we actually were thinking of Ken Vassie. We wanted Ken Vassie in the group, who was a member of Randy Sparks' group, the Back Porch Majority.
I heard of that. Yeah.
I ever heard. Ken turned us down. Ken wasn't interested. It was just too much of a risk for him. He was working. And so then Kenny started to make a lot more sense to us. And we began to have Kenny in, and Kenny sang with us.
So you settled on Kenny Rogers.
We settled on Kenny Rogers, which was probably the greatest thing that could happen to us.
The greatest settlement.
Right. So we also learned from the Christies that having a girl in the group introduced a whole other audience when you had a girl in the group. And we liked that idea, and we decided that we wanted to have a female in the first edition. And so at the time, Mike Settle and I were the very first to leave the New Christy Minstrels. Mike and I left. We left with the intent of trying to start and get our record deal. Because of my relationship with my mother, who worked with Bowen, that's why I gave you that
Jimmy
story.
Bowen.
And Jimmy knew me, and Mom set up an in-office audition for us. We had tried to get our girl together, and I had thought of a girl that I did some demos with named Karen Carpenter, who I was going to call. But before I could even do that, Kenny called from Las Vegas saying, no, a new girl just joined the Christy Minstrels. Her name is Thelma Camacho, and she is perfect for the first edition. So they flew down to LA. She sang a few songs with us, and we all hooked up, and we knew that that's what we wanted to do. That was the group. So we did the live audition for Jimmy Bowen, and Jimmy flipped out.
In his office.
He saw it. We did a live audition in his office.
Not even a studio.
Nope, no studio. We just talked live, which was what made it so powerful when we do stations, doing a radio stations, because we didn't need the equipment. We could come in and sing our songs live,
Well, yeah.
and very, very powerful. So he said, I got a young kid that I just hired that I feel very strongly about, and I want him to produce you. His name was Mike Post.
Mike Post.
Never had a hit at that point. Never had a hit record. He had worked a lot with Sonny and Cher. I did a couple sessions for him while they were still Caesar and Cleo, not Sonny and Cher. And so I had known Mike Post, but the long story short, next thing we knew, we were in the Studio A at United, and recording our very first album for Reprise, which included Just Dropped In. And it's interesting because we originally put the group together out of 4 frontmen, really. These were 4 lead singers that were all equally good. We all sang great lead. And the first 3 records of the first edition were 3 different singers. The very first single came off the album was a song called I Found a Reason, and Mike Settle sang lead. The second song that came, but it did well regionally in some areas, but it didn't break nationally. The second song was a song called Just Dropped In to See What Condition My Condition Was In, which Kenny sang. Boom, through the roof. Number 2 in the nation. It was huge. The third, which was a follow-up to it, was a song called Only Me, which I sang. So the first 3 singles were all 3 different people. And if you listen to our albums, the first 3 or 4 albums, that's what it was. A different person sang lead on everything.
Kind of like Chicago at one time, right?
Very much, very much. But the public was having a hard time, I think, identifying with 4 individuals. And obviously, because of the sales and the success of Just Dropped In, they really latched on to Kenny's vocal. And there was something about Kenny's singing that just lit a match for the people. So our very first performance was going to be at Randy Sparks' Ledbetter's. And I heard Ken Cragen tell this story, and I just want to correct a couple things, because I think maybe Ken had been smoking some Crayolas or something.
Crayolas.
Actually, Mike Settle called his friend that he knew from college, Mason Williams, and to come. He invited Mason down to see us at Ledbetter's. Now, at the time, Mason was a writer on the Smothers Brothers show, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. He was one of
the joke writers?
Yes.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. And so Mason came down, and I forget who he came down with. It might have been that attorney that Ken was talking about, because Ken was not there the first night. Mason came down, and Mason saw the group, and he was so knocked out with the group that the next night he had brought everybody. He brought Ken Cragen, Ken Fritz, who was Kenny's partner at that time, Ken Cragen and Fritz, Tommy Smothers, and they all sat, and just the next thing we knew, we had one of the most powerful managers in the business that had signed us. But remember, we already had a record deal. This group was going to go someplace, John. You know, it was a well-oiled, professional guys. We all knew what we were doing. Good singers. We knew something was going to happen somewhere. But when Ken Cragen came on board, we already had a deal with Reprise, and we had already cut an album. We're cutting an album at the time. So because Ken was also the executive producer of the Smothers Brothers show, that machine got into play. Okay.
So you got on TV.
Oh, not only do we get on TV, our coming out party, every group that starts has a coming out party for press, newspaper, magazines, whatever, to introduce the launching of the group. Our party was on stage, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour stage at CBS Television City, on the set of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. We did the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour when, in order to get that was probably the biggest variety show of its time. And in order to get on that show, you had to have a monster record. And at that time, we didn't. All that time.
67, 68, Terry?
67.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so we did the show. Now, after that, but the sponsors of the Smothers Brothers show was Dodge. So Dodge provided us with a van and a station wagon for our tour.
Ah,
CBS also owned Fender.
guitars.
So, yep, and amps. So we drove down to Santa Ana. You talk about a Southern California kid's dream come true. We have Fender that's going to endorse us, and we went down to Santa Ana to choose anything we wanted, and we just grabbed all our amps, guitars, everything. Kenny, when he first started playing with us, had to play his
Yeah.
electric bass like an upright, because he'd never played electric bass before. So he'd play it straight up and down for a little bit. Then as rehearsals would go along, it would finally come down to a normal, to where it was.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
But that's basically the machine that Ken Cragen, besides the fact that he could book like nobody, because he would use, if you do this, I'll have Tom and Dick do this for you.
Yeah.
And he was absolutely brilliant at that type of stuff.
So the quid pro quo existed way back before Donald Trump.
Absolutely, baby, and it worked. It really did.
Quid pro quo.
Yeah.
So
So
the amazing thing is, a lot of people aren't aware of the fact that Cragen had a relationship with First Edition prior to Kenny as a solo act.
Oh, yes. Yes, Ken Cragen managed the First Edition and managed me as well. That's a long story, but when Roland came out, I mean, I was just basically the guitar player in the group. But when Roland happened, the show began to get fan mail. And I got letters from 16 magazine saying that I was getting as much mail as David Cassidy was from the Partridge Family. So the next thing you knew, they see Ken sees this Teen Idol thing run. So we start to lean more that way. So things changed a big deal for me for when we had the television show. But I just wanted to tell a quick story because Cragen was talking about the first tour, and we were talking about working the Unicorn. It was called the Unicorn, was the name of that. I couldn't remember.
In Boston.
And we put the TV on the stage because we had such a small audience so that we could watch ourselves on the Smothers Brothers show. But my favorite story from that tour was when we went to New York, because the primary reason to go to New York was to do the Tonight Show.
Well, let me stop you. Let me stop you for 1 second, because you ran through Boston very quickly, and since I'm in Boston, it's special to me. Now, you guys were playing. Was it like in a cellar?
Yep,
Okay.
we were staying at the Vendome Hotel.
Oh, which is a very famous place because that was where the fire was.
Yeah, it burned down, which I found out later. I did on the computer. I didn't found out about.
Okay, so you had already taped the Smothers Brothers show?
Yes.
Okay, but it hadn't gone public yet.
We had already taped the Smothers Brothers show, right? But
and that's going on at a certain time of night, like at 9 o'clock live.
Exactly. It coincided with our show time.
You brought a TV.
We were bummed out that we were going to miss the show. And we looked out and we saw 4 people in the audience, and we said, hey, let's just put the TV on the stage. And it's funny because it turned out to be a very special night for those people that were in the audience.
Was it all black and white? Was it even in color, or was it a black and white?
Color.
Color, okay. Okay.
Yep.
So now you're playing live, but you've got a TV on stage.
Right.
And you're showing the 4 people in the audience.
Right.
That you're on the Smothers Brothers show.
I think 2 of those 4 people were Reprise promotion guys. So.
Oh, that is way too funny. That is way too funny. Okay, so now you go to New York. Go to New York.
Now we go to New York to do the Tonight Show, and the story is a very quick story. The show is shot about 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right. Yep.
Tape delayed to show again at 11 o'clock or 11:30, whatever it was.
Yeah. And Johnny Carson was doing it, right?
Right. Johnny Carson was doing it. But we were on tour, and we had to climb, as soon as we were done with that show, we had to climb in our van and our truck and head off because we were due in Denver next on our first tour. So we shot the Tonight Show, and we climbed in our cars, and we took off down the road, and I guess we were somewhere in middle Pennsylvania.
Oh, now it's 11 o'clock at night.
Around airtime at 11 o'clock at night. And I mean, buddy, we were in the boonies.
Yeah.
And we saw this it was like a motel with the M missing. You know, it was like hotel.
Oh,
It was kind of blinking, this creepy looking
yeah.
place. And we thought, well, maybe they got a TV in their lobby. So we pulled in and we walked into this place, and the poor man behind the desk thought he was being assaulted by these hippies, these long hairs that all got out of their car at like 11:30 at night.
Yeah.
And he had a look on his face like it was his last day. He was being robbed. And we said, "Do you have a TV?" And I guess he thought maybe we're going to steal it. And anyway, he said, "Yeah, it's over here." I said, "Well, we just want to, can we use it? Can we turn it on? Because we want to see ourselves. We're on the Tonight Show." And he gave us that, "Yeah, sure, you're on the Tonight Show look." And he said, "Go ahead. There it is over there." So we go over and turn on the TV. As luck would have it, we turn it on, and there's Johnny introducing us. This guy, next thing I know, his eyes are as big as saucers. He goes, "It is. You guys really are on the Tonight Show." He goes back and wakes up his wife, his kids. He brings them out. They're totally sound. They've been in bed for a couple hours now, and they're out and getting autographs. And it was an amazing time. It really was.
So you guys had to drive to Denver from New York?
We did what? I'm sorry?
You had to drive to Denver, Colorado from New York?
Yeah. The whole tour was, we drove from Los Angeles. We did the Smothers Brothers show. We shot it and left directly from CBS Television City and drove to Chicago, where we did a show for college buyers. And then we drove from Chicago to Columbus, Ohio, because just our Mike Settle's single, the I Found a Reason, was being released, and in Columbus. It was a very popular breakout town, Columbus was. And then we drove from Columbus to Boston, from Boston to New York, and from New York to Denver, Denver back to LA.
Okay. So this probably explains why Kenny was so at ease being on the back of the bus, because my understanding is that you didn't have a bus, you didn't have trailers, you didn't have a road crew. Talk about when you would pull into a gig. Give me that scoop. When you'd pull into a gig, you'd unload, set up, what?
I remember one particular, this is a perfect story for you. We never missed a gig. In almost 10 years, we never missed a performance.
Yeah.
This particular performance, we were running extremely late. We were on a bus and the weather was awful. We were so late that the audience had already been seated. And this was not a place that had a curtain like an auditorium. This was a gymnasium.
Yeah.
And all it had was a big riser. So we came in off the road after being on the road all day, flying and then driving. We came in looking pretty haggard, pushing our equipment in and setting up our equipment in front of the audience. The entire audience was in, and we began having interaction with the audience,
It must have been getting restless by now.
Well, they had been, but now they knew that the first edition had shown up. They were concerned that maybe we weren't going to be there and they were going to be ripped off, but then we showed up. And anyway, it turned out to be one of the greatest concerts we ever did, because I remember, I think I said something on the mic that once we got all set up, we did our sound check, we tested, we tuned, we sat up in front of the entire audience. And I said, "Excuse us for a second, we're going to be gone for about 10 minutes and we will come back as the first edition." Boom. So off we went. We went down to the dressing room and we got into our black and white outfits, which is all we wore for the first
Black and white.
Right. And came back as the first edition. But you know what's funny? I'll tell you, John, because we bonded with that audience like no other audience we ever had. And by the time we were done, the entire audience was helping us with our equipment. They were helping us load our bus and things like that. So
that's funny.
We had no roadies or anything like that. And our bus at that time, a tour bus, was a Greyhound that we chartered. It wasn't like tour buses of today.
Yeah, it was a Greyhound.
Yeah, it was a Greyhound, a chartered Greyhound.
With that smell of the bathroom coming from the back.
Oh yeah, yeah,
right?
it was lovely.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, those old silver greyhounds.
Yep.
You see them all over the place. So then you had to tear the show down and go to another city. And now,
Well, Just Dropped In was huge at that time.
yeah,
And one thing that when you have a hit record, you can book things, and Ken Craig can sure tell you better than I can. When you have a hot act like that, you can book things right next to each other. One
close by.
next because everybody knows who you are.
Yeah.
It's when you quit having hit records that you start going from LA to Miami, Miami to Seattle, Seattle to New York, New York back to, you know what I mean? So that's what it was. It was one-nighters, probably 3 weeks of one-nighters, traveling all day, setting up, tearing down, climbing back in the bus, traveling all day and all night again, do it again,
Yeah. Now you and Mike are running the show. Kenny's just one of the people that is there, right? Pretty much.
Well, Mike and I were the original guys in the group,
Okay.
but we all became 4 equal partners when we put the group together. Once the group as a whole was established, we were all equal partners.
Okay. So
Kenny, Tom, and I.
My understanding, it was because when you announced the first 3 hits, Mickey, not Mickey, but Mike had one, you had one, and Kenny had one. And Kenny's, was more. Was it you, the person that said, "Look, let's forget this thing about changing lead singers each time, and let's have some consistency and call it Kenny Rogers in the first edition"? How did that come?
Well, Ken's recollection was a little different than mine, but you have to remember it was by that time, it was already clear that Kenny's voice was, because But You Know I Love You was huge. And it was already clear to Mike Settle, and it was clear to me too, that they were latching on to Kenny's voice. There was no question about that. So we had, But You Know I Love You had a follow-up record out called Once Again She's All Alone that was doing very, very well on one of the coasts. I think it was the East Coast. And both But You Know I Love You and Ruby Don't Take Your Love to Town were on our '69 album. But all of a sudden, the Drake stations in California lift Ruby, excuse me, off the album. It wasn't a single. They just pulled it off the album and started playing it. And it just started taking hold like we couldn't believe. I mean, it was, the whole West Coast was on Ruby Don't Take Your Love to Town, while the East Coast was on Once Again She's All Alone.
Oh, wow.
But you know what? Maybe we could have, we could even have 2 hit records at the same time. Not many people. I think the Beatles were the only group that really did that.
Mm.
But it wasn't out of ego. It was just that we had 2 different records that were really popular and being played and picked up by DJs everywhere. But you can't release 2 records under the same name, because as soon as you release a second record, the label will pull the first record. And so because Kenny had sung lead on Ruby, we put Kenny Rogers in the first edition on the label.
Okay.
So, well, needless to say, Ruby blew the roof off of all the other records and became, excuse me, the biggest record we ever had, the most powerful record we ever had.
So there was no power play by Kenny saying, "I'm taking over here."
Absolutely.
I think
that decision was not a corporate decision.
Yep.
That decision to change the name was not by Ken Cragen, was not by Mo Austin or Jimmy Bowen, although they may have influenced that. They may have suggested that to Kenny. That was a meeting for me and me alone to make that decision, because Mike Settle and Thelma had left the group. They were gone at that time.
Oh, okay.
That left Kenny and I as the owners of the group. So he couldn't do it. He couldn't do anything without me, and I couldn't do anything without him.
Okay. Because
so
I think there's a perception that when people put their name at the top of the marquee, that it's them that's doing it out of ego and, but
right.
Not the case.
It wasn't the case in this case, no. Kenny sure didn't mind it. I mean, it wasn't hurting him, that's for darn sure. It was harder on me, that's for sure. It was hard, you just imagine you start a group as equals with everybody, and all of a sudden, but it's like a team. It really is. And even I, being a younger guy, realized that it was what was best for the group. I didn't care what happened as long as it was best for the first edition.
Yep.
And clearly, this was the best thing for the first edition. So I remember Kenny coming up to me in front of this meeting and saying, "Terry, I can't believe this is happening." He said, "If it were me and the tables were turned, I'd leave the group."
I'd be upset.
He knew how difficult this was for me. So, but I said, okay. And we went for it. And so it was difficult. It really was. I have a headline from us in England, and it said, "England welcomes Kenny Rogers." No mention.
No mention of you guys.
Yeah. And that kind of thing happened all the time. And that's the kind of thing that just happens naturally when you put one of the guys out front. Mm-hmm. So there were things like that occurred, but Kenny was always great. We'd do interviews, and he'd say things to the interviewers. "Hey, listen, why don't you ask a couple of the other guys these questions? You're all directing the questions at me. Ask one of the other guys these questions." And they go, "Oh, okay. So, Kenny, what do you think about the?" You know what I mean? That's the way that it was.
Exactly.
And it got to the point to where we didn't even go to the interviews anymore.
Oh, wow.
We're waiting for our golf clubs to come through, and we go play golf.
Go play golf. So, the years went on, and Kenny went on his own, et cetera, but you never stopped becoming friends, because didn't you work for him at Lion's Share?
Yes, I did. He actually, I was doing the backgrounds. I have the distinct title, if you want to call it that, or maybe it's my own title, of being the only person that has sung on more Kenny Rogers albums than anybody except Kenny Rogers.
Except Kenny.
I've done 23 albums with Kenny. And I was doing the arranging and the singing of all the backgrounds on his Share Your Love album that Lionel Richie was producing. So we were working at a studio called Concord, which used to be the old ABC Dunhill Studios. And I suggested to Kenny that he buy a studio. Why don't you get a studio? He was buying horse jacuzzis, and he was getting everything at that time. He was buying stuff you couldn't believe. Said, "You love the studio so much, get a studio." He bought the studio, and we renamed it Lion's Share, and he hired me to be the studio director, to run the day-to-day operations, to redesign it, and to make it the best studio in the world, which is exactly what we did.
Exactly. So what was it like being at the 50th anniversary show that was shot at Foxwoods? When you were part of that?
Yeah, I was, and there's a story that kind of goes along with that too, because we did when Just Dropped In was kind of starting to peter out a little bit. Ken Cragen, power guy that he is, got us on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Ed Sullivan Show.
Yep. And let me tell you, buddy, I was so excited, I couldn't believe it, because I played the solo in Just Dropped In. The solo was actually played by several guitar players, one of which was Glenn Campbell, who I had done work with before. Glenn and I were friends. But Glenn's pass at the solo was taken and reversed and put up in front of the record. So I actually played the solo on the record. The solo, in those days, it was only 4 tracks. The albums were 4-track. So to find room for everything, you had to find room wherever you could, because you only had 4 tracks to deal with. There wasn't a track available for my pass at the solo. So what we did is we put it on the lead vocal track, because the lead wasn't singing there. So the lead vocal track not only had Kenny's lead vocal, but it had my guitar solo. We would do things like when you do a mix of a record in those days, you would do a TV mix, they'd call it. And a TV mix is actually the same mix of the record, only without the lead vocal. And that's what you take to TV stations and stuff to lip sync to, or to sing live.
And then you add the vocals live.
We add the vocals live. So that's what we did for Ed Sullivan. We removed the lead vocal. But unbeknownst to me, that meant that they also removed the guitar solo. So when it came time for the solo, there was no guitar solo. It was devastating to me. I mean, I knew I wasn't singing lead, but I had the guitar solo. This is going to be great on the Ed Sullivan Show. So when we did the 50th, we were setting that up, and the guy told us, "Yeah, you're going to be doing Just Dropped In," and I'm thinking, "Oh, this is great! I'm going to finally get my chance
Guitar.
to solo on TV." So we get there, and it's actually somebody else played it. Somebody else played the solo, so it was a double whammy on me. But it was a lot of fun. It really was. It was an honor seeing a lot of songs that we did that were sung by other artists like Winona, and just so many great artists on the show. And it was wonderful. It was great seeing Kenny again, and we had a great time.
Yeah. And then the next time I know, when he was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, you all got together there.
Yes, and that was an amazing night. It really was. We were. It was it was like we were being inducted, because they had a whole exposition of Kenny at that time. It wasn't just a normal thing that the artists have in the Hall of Fame. When they're first inducted, he had a whole floor that was all dedicated to his career. And so much of it was the first edition. And so there we were, in the Hall of Fame. I mean, it wasn't us being inducted, it was Kenny being inducted, of course. But we were there and we were part of it. And it was just a very proud moment for all of us. It was proud for all the group. I remember calling Mickey, and because Mickey had fallen sick at that point, our drummer, and just telling him what a moment it was and how proud he would have been. And it was just proud. We were very proud of Kenny.
Mickey, who wrote Just Dropped In?
No, that was Mickey Newberry. We had a drummer in his name.
Mickey Jones.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay.
Mickey had fallen sick and was unable to be there. So.
Okay. So during the private times, at this event in Nashville, when the cameras weren't on and you weren't posing and all that other stuff, did you bring up any of these did you guys talk about any of the old days of schlepping your own gear and, and how did Kenny respond to that? How did he react to it?
A lot of it he really reacted to. Some of it he just couldn't
remember.
And I said, "Do I look at all familiar to you? Do I look familiar, Kenny?" And no, we talked about old times and things that we did. He turned a van over once. He flipped a van coming on our first tour, same tour, coming into Denver. We were driving in the van, and it was an icy road, man. And I'm from Southern California. I don't know anything about that. He said, "Terry, you don't know how to drive in this stuff. You better let me drive." So he gets behind the wheel, and I go up to ride in the other car. And next thing, Mike Settle, who's driving the car, says, "I don't see the van anywhere. I don't know where it is." "You're kidding. Pull over. Let's wait for it." We pulled over. It wasn't there. So we turned around and went back, and there it was, wheels up. Mickey was outside. He was freezing to death. Kenny had flipped it, and and he didn't remember that. I said, "How can you not
remember that?" He didn't remember.
You got to remember too. I guess that those kind of memories are, I don't know, I can't imagine what it must have been like for Kenny to have the kind of fame that he had. I can remember us as the group, but, he did so many wonderful things, and, meeting with presidents and things was no big deal for him, so I guess a lot of those memories were kind of foggy,
But when you met with him, he was still, he was appreciative of what you all had done together.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we did a talk thing at the Hall of Fame, and it was scheduled to be just the first edition. It was scheduled to be Mike Settle and myself and Mary Miller, and Kenny found out about it, and he just wanted to be a part of it. And I remember when he came up backstage before it started, the guy was asking Kenny if he wanted. He said, "No. This isn't about me today. This is about the first edition today." So that's what it was. And he basically let me, I'm the only one with a memory left. I don't know what happened with Mike Settle, but because I remembered all this stuff and I have all the jokes and the stories, I was always kind of the spark plug of the group and the jokester of the group.
Well, you were the youngest.
I was the youngest.
Yeah.
It was the greatest thing that ever happened to me in my life. So I remember every inch of it, John. I remember it all like it was yesterday,
Yeah.
I don't have bigger things to choose from, it's it was an amazing time.
So, I was going through your Facebook page, and right after Kenny passed in March 20th, for several weeks you posted Kenny Rogers memories.
Yeah.
Were they written down somewhere, or did they just come to mind, and
Yep.
you let your heart take over your keyboard?
That's it. That's exactly it, John.
I mean, your
That's
keyboard
exactly
for your
it.
computer.
Now, they were just memories in my heart and in my mind, and it just poured out. Yep.
Yeah. And we should tell people obviously your Facebook page is public. So if you want to
Yep.
see some of those stories, they're absolutely priceless. Go to Terry Williams' Facebook page and scroll back to run March 21st for a month or so, and Terry remembered Kenny. And again, that's the stuff that's not going to appear on the album jackets. It's not going to appear in the PR releases. It's not going to, Ed Sullivan or Johnny Carson are not going to ask you about those things. But the thing that we're finding, Terry, when we do these, I don't know, you want to call them mini documentaries or whatever, is that those are the stories that the public wants to hear, because they've heard all the other manufactured stuff.
Right.
And I don't mean that it's not real, but it's all been written to be on TV.
Right.
Okay? And we're talking from the heart, et cetera. So is there one particular story as we close that you want to tell that the public would have no idea, or at the same time, tell a story about what you learned from working with Kenny back when Kenny was, schlepping, turning vans over, that you may have learned from? And
I would tell the story of
a long question.
Cher. He was a guy that was so driven, and he really worked on his craft. This guy was a great, great singer, always was. He always was more comfortable in a group than he was as a single, always. He'd tell you that today. He's much more comfortable singing parts because he was a great part singer, came up and just thought of some great parts. But John, if you listen, his idol at the time when we put the group together was Ray Charles.
Ray Charles.
If you listen to his vocal on Just Dropped In, it's Ray Charles. It really is. The licks, everything, it's just Ray Charles. He loved Ray Charles. But he still worked on his voice. And I know from the Bee Gees, he got the
That's where he got that from?
Yep. And he took that, he got the growl. He started growling like he used in The Gambler and he used in so many of our records. He began to develop these little idiosyncrasies with his voice. And that's how you ended up with this great recording artist, because that's really what he was. He was a terrific recording artist who had an incredible ear for hit songs, incredible ear for it. And, he sometimes overloaded himself. He thought of himself as a record producer, and he really wasn't. He wasn't a record producer.
You were.
I was. I did a lot. Well, as a matter of fact, and it worked out in a way that I saw that most of our hit records were produced by Mike Post and Jimmy Bowen. Kenny didn't really produce any of our huge hits. And it was because Kenny never listened to the radio. He wasn't a very contemporary guy. And the best thing Kenny could do was to be an artist and to sing. And when we started Lion's Share, it was interesting because the day I finished building the new studio, it took us about a year, I finished the room, and the first session in there, of course, was Kenny. And he had booked a double date of about 12 triple scale musicians, which was probably about a $10,000, $15,000 day, doing a double date, which is 6 hours. And I came in at the end of the day and I said, "How you doing?" And he was all by himself in the control room, and he had his head in his hands, and he's going, "It was crap. It was all crap. I hated it. There's nothing there. I got nothing out of all this." And he had produced this thing. He said, "I need a hit so bad." He said, "I need it." No, like he didn't need a hit. It's just been a couple of months since he'd had one. That's all. Through the Years, I think, was the last one that he'd had. It just so happened that the day before, Michael O'Mardian, another great producer, was in Studio A working on something, and he introduced me to a guy that was doing bass overdubs on a song called She Works Hard for the Money, and it was David Foster.
David Foster.
And I looked at David and I was introduced to him, and my mind went back the day before to Kenny with his head in his hands. And I said, David, would you be interested in producing Kenny Rogers? And I'll never forget his first question. He said, does he swing? And that was a musical term, not any.
Yeah.
Let me clarify that.
Yeah, let's verify that.
And I said, oh yeah, he swings. Long story short, 2 days, and I went to tell Kenny. I was so excited. I said, Kenny, David Foster wants to produce you. He said, who's he? He had no idea who David was.
Had he already done Chicago by then?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yep. He'd already done Chicago, resurrected Chicago, boy.
Yep.
Career. And Dolly Parton's Here She Comes Again, or Here We Come Again. Anyway, he didn't know who he was, but 2 days later, we were in Studio A with Sheena Easton doing We've Got Tonight.
And that was a David Foster production.
That was a David Foster production. I did all the backgrounds on all those things too.
I know it's late. I know
that's
you're weary.
Behind the scenes thing that Kenny would never know about. He would just think that he and David had been together all this, but, I looked at it and I said, oh, wait, I've starred in this movie before when he had all those songs that he produced and he didn't like any of them. I said, I know what you're doing. Stop trying to be a producer and be what you are, one of the greatest recording artists of all time. And that's what he did. When he left the first edition, that's what happened. He went to Larry Butler. Larry Butler was a great record producer. And Larry Butler said, I'm going to produce you like an artist. He didn't try to produce anything or engineer anything or anything like that. He just chose songs and sang and did what he did best. And look what happened. Boom, 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 one after another. So,
what were the thoughts that ran through your mind when you got the word that Kenny was gone?
My wife woke me up. I wasn't surprised because of the times that I'd spent with him in the last few years. He was getting extremely frail. We did a show with him at a theater in Nashville. It was the last show he was going to do there.
Was that Schermerhorn?
No, that wasn't the Schermerhorn. We did the Schermerhorn with him as well. No, that was the stadium. I can't think of the name of the
Okay. Yeah, Nissan Stadium.
Where the Predators play.
Yep, the big stadium.
The Bridgestone.
CMA. Yeah.
And he was looking really frail. He had to sit down. He couldn't stand up for any length of time. The whole show, he and Wanda sat on the side of the stage and sat in chairs, like director's chairs. So I wasn't necessarily surprised by it, but I was totally unprepared with how it was going to impact me.
Okay, that was the Gambler's Last Stand, that show in the arena. I'm sorry, I was thinking the football stadium.
Right.
The hockey team.
The Gambler's Last show, right.
That's what Don Henley came to that. And
yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Who was a real good friend of ours. So yes, Don came to it. So I was unprepared for how it was going to affect me. And it wasn't until I saw the A&E special, which we did a year before Kenny had passed.
Yeah.
And we were kind of waiting for it to come out. But then I got the word that it was going to be shown, and I watched it with my family. And I still get emotional about it because he meant so much to me. And I didn't realize how much he did mean to me, I guess, and how much of a footprint in my life that he left, not only as a man. We never had an argument in the group, never once. Contrary to anything anybody ever tells you, we never even raised our voices to each other. We all loved each other so much. Kenny and I had been so close for so many years, and we had so much mutual respect for one another to put his biggest investment in my hands. He just was a huge, huge mentor to me, and I loved him very much, and it was a very difficult thing for me.
So you're out there watching the show from the audience, or were you guys on the stage?
Yes.
Okay, you're
Yeah.
on that stage. Okay.
You mean at the Bridgestone?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, we
Yeah.
did the Bridgestone. No, I was talking about I was just sitting with my family when the
With the
A&E
TV show.
special
Yeah.
aired,
Yeah.
and you know, it was
Yeah.
an amazing thing to see, because I had told the story on the A&E special of the first time we did Tell It All Brother. The first time we did Tell It All Brother was at Kent State University, a month after the shooting.
Yeah.
No, a week after the shooting, and the smell of smoke was still in the auditorium. And we did Tell It All Brother. And when we got to it was the very first time we'd ever done it. When we got to the chorus, the audience, there was about 10,000 kids in this audience, and they all stood up in the middle of the show, stood up and started singing and applauding and
Yeah.
cheering. I'd never seen anything like that. It wasn't unusual for us to get standing ovations at the end of our shows, but not in the middle of it. So, and but you know, he was a huge footprint in my life, huge, and I loved him.
It's ironic that you bring up Kent State, because earlier this week I interviewed one of the people who was responsible for the choirs, the Christmas show choirs, and he was, it was called the Voices of Ohio, and they did 11 shows in 10 years, all over Ohio, Columbus, Cleveland, over in Pittsburgh, etc. But that guy was a student at Kent State when the riots took place in 70 or 71, something like that. And when we were talking with Kenny, just like you, he started crying at the end. He said, look, you know what? It was such a special time. And one thing, Terry, that virtually everybody that I've talked to, and I think there's about 15 or 16 people that we've done these segments with already, they all said, and even the crew, that, like Frank Farrell said, I never heard Kenny raise his voice to anyone, even when there were technical snafus. One night, half the monitors on the stage were out, but nobody knew it. And Kenny did, if you've been around showbiz long enough, you know that there are some egos out on that stage with crazy tempers that will yell at their own people on stage or stop the show.
Yep.
But you just continue the series of people saying, I never heard Kenny raise his voice to anyone.
Never heard him raise his voice, and I never heard him use a word of profanity.
Yep.
Never.
Yep.
He was just, that's the way he was. He just never got angry. Yep. The only time I ever saw him get upset is when somebody put a D in his name.
Oh, R-O-D-G.
Yeah. Boy, he didn't like that.
Your final thoughts as we sign off.
Oh, gosh. John, I've been doing this for so many years now, I guess even for 56, 57 years that Kenny and I have been together. It's always wonderful talking about Kenny, talking about the first edition, which is Kenny's subsequent success. I don't need to talk about that. Everybody knows about that. But the first edition was such a special, wonderful time. It always just brings back such wonderful memories to me and rejuvenates me. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to share these things and share these stories. Thanks for asking people to go to my Facebook page. They can see a lot of these things that I wrote about him. I have a lot of inside information that a lot of people don't have of him. So, yeah.
It's funny, when I look back now, Warren Hartman, who was his music director for 20 years, I don't know if you ever met Warren.
Yes.
But Kenny, about 20 years prior, again, another Ohio story, Kenny saw Warren playing in a band, and Keith brought him into the studio, into the theater to see Warren, and Kenny subsequently produced an album for Warren. And then he went to Warren and said, I need a musical director. Do you want the job? And Warren said, thank you for the opportunity, but I want to go to music school. So I'm not going to take it. And then 20 years later, he took it. So now I talk to you and you tell me that Kenny wasn't your first choice.
Right, right,
So,
exactly.
so you know, which kind of is a story that um, Kenny used to tell people when I was talking to a couple of the kids that were in the Christmas shows, where Kenny would always encourage them to just don't worry about temporary disappointments, just forge on. And you know, I don't know. Does Kenny ever know that he wasn't the first choice for the first? That he was the
Oh, yeah,
second choice for the first edition?
yeah. As a matter of fact, that's why we didn't feel as though he was contemporary enough, and that's why he grew his beard.
Oh,
That's why he wore the glasses. That's why he put an earring in his ear. That was
but
an attempt to
for
look
business purposes. For
hip,
business
cool.
purposes.
Yeah. Even Ken Cragen mentioned, referred to that,
Yeah, yeah.
the smoky glasses and a beard, and he did a physical remake of himself,
Yeah.
you know, and isn't it ironic? Isn't that something?
Yeah.
It's a Hall of Fame. We were talking about that, and I said, man, can we pick a lead singer or what? This guy.
Yeah, yeah, whatever.
Uh,
So we want to thank you so much and let you know, everybody, that we've been talking with Mr. Terry Williams, the founder of the first edition, which Kenny Rogers subsequently joined, and the story is clear from there. And if you want to hear other stories like this, down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, there's a little red button. Hit subscribe, and then a bell lights up. Hit the bell, and you'll get it there. And